While the world has been focused here on Ukraine, Putin has been making silent moves across Africa, and he's using the same weapon he used on Ukraine 8 years ago. A ruthless mercenary group who have been accused of torture, rape, violence, and killings in some of Africa's most vulnerable states. And their malicious presence is not just offline, it's also spreading like wildfire across the internet. It's subtle techniques like this that's helping him paint the African continent white, blue, and red. It's time we learn how he's doing it and what this means for the people of Africa. Why China is in Africa. There are so many videos of why China are in Africa. Really great ones, from Johnny Harris to Polymatter. The list goes on. But there's also this guy who, while in the middle of trying to literally steal Ukraine, is lurking around the African continent. And this is something that not many are aware of, or at least talking about, because Russia's every move in Africa is super calculated. It started in 2006 with Putin's first ever visit to Africa. And since then, the partnership between these two has been slowly but steadily growing. But it was at this event in 2019 where these two parties took their relationship to the next level. Putin said on a global stage that ties with African nations was one of Russia's top priorities, attended by over 40 heads of state. And Putin wasn't just hyperbolizing or being facetious to try and get some street credit with these nations. He meant this. And a year later, Russia became Africa's largest arms supplier. Between 2017 and 2021, Russia accounted for 44% of imports of major arms to the region. Countries in Africa are embracing these arms partnerships because not only did Russia undercut other nations on costs, it's almost a no questions asked kind of deal. These clips are from Nigeria in 2014 during the Boko Haram insurgency. Boko Haram is an Islamic terrorist organization who started an armed rebellion against the government of Nigeria after long-standing issues of religious violence in the country. The Nigerian government asked the United States for weapons to help fight the rebel group, and the US just flat out said no because of the alleged human rights abuses caused by Nigerian soldiers. And when that happened, Nigeria just simply turned to Russia and said, hey, will you help us with weapons to fight these guys? And instantly signed a contract for 12 Mi-35 helicopter gunships. No questions asked. You see, Putin and Russia don't really care what these countries do with these weapons, whereas countries like the US expect some accountability. Similarly, Russia had carefully and strategically targeted various nations in the continent under the presence of being a provider. But African states have lost so much more than what Russia invested in them. Let's have a look at what happened in the ex-French colony of Mali. In 2012, a jihadist insurgency began in Mali, and the following year, France decided to step in. By 2015, the insurgency had spread to multiple regions in the Sahel like Niger and Burkina Faso. It even pulled in help from its ally, the United States, but conflicts in the region kept growing. That's what you need to know for this story, but obviously the conflict is so much bigger than this, so we've linked further reading and some interesting videos in the description below. Along with the increased conflicts, hatred for France kept growing among civilians in Mali. It was evident that they no longer wanted to live under a French neo-colonialism rule. This was exactly what Russia needed. This was their window. And Vladimir Putin was about to send in his secret weapon.
Wagner Group.
Wagner Group. Wagner Group.
So Putin's secret weapon comes in the form of a private military company, the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group is a network of mercenaries that officially doesn't exist, but is reportedly associated with the Kremlin and is Vladimir Putin's de facto private army. But obviously it's hush-hush, nobody knows about it, nobody talks about it. Putin has never confirmed this, but its founder, I'm not even going to attempt to butcher this Russian name, so
Yevgeny Prigozhin.
that guy, Wagner Group's founder, is a Russian businessman, an incredibly close ally of Putin, and he's even called Putin's chef because he handles a lot of the Kremlin's catering business. Okay. Anyway, after denying for years on end about his involvement with Wagner Group, he finally admitted in September this year that he founded the group. I mean, come on. Also, this guy's story is fascinating. It involves a 9-year jail term and a food cart. Let us know in the comment section if you'd like to know more about him. But yeah, him, Putin, they have nothing to do with each other in terms of Wagner Group. Okay, that's the story we're going with. But in all seriousness, Wagner Group first appeared in 2014 when Putin launched his first assault on Ukraine. It then expanded to Syria in 2015 before entering the African continent in 2017. In December of 2021, the group arrived in Mali and began capitalizing on the anti-French sentiment in the region. They eventually swooped in to fill the void that was left by the French after they withdrew troops in February of 2022. And Mali embraced this. The Russian intervention offered them an alternative to the French and its colonial past, and bridged the gap in managing the country's security and governance. And it's not just Mali that this group has started to infiltrate. They have stepped into neighboring conflicts in the Central African Republic, Mozambique, Sudan, Libya, and more. In the Central African Republic, Russia's infiltration was evident when people held up Russian flags and portraits of Putin when the military overthrew the civil administration in 2020. Despite severe and repeated cases of horrific abuse against civilians, Wagner's presence still continues. More than a dozen Western nations condemned Mali for deploying the Wagner Group. The government simply denied it, and they responded by saying Russian trainers were present to strengthen operational capabilities for national defense. So let's just pause and take a broader look at the situation and ask the question, what does Putin want? Well, in exchange for their services, they are paid in cash or they're provided concessions to mining precious minerals. In places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Namibia, and the Central African Republic, Russian companies are actively mining resources such as gold, diamond, cobalt, coltan, and uranium. The uranium mine, for example, is used in Russia's nuclear energy projects back home and across Africa. Some reports even suggest its economic benefits from oil and gas and even forestry businesses in Africa. It's estimated to be making millions and millions of dollars. And Russia's influence and control in Africa is only growing. It's looking to fill the needs such as the lack of affordable and reliable electricity sources. Rosatom, Russia's state atomic energy corporation, will be constructing Egypt's first nuclear power plant for a whopping $25 billion. This project is known to be the largest business venture between the two countries in decades. In fact, it has signed similar nuclear energy deals with other African countries. Russia has meddled in local politics, manipulated people with Russian propaganda, and spread misinformation. It even produced action movies and funded beauty pageants. According to reports, Russia's disinformation campaigns have political objectives which revolves around anti-democratic, anti-West, anti-UN messages, and of course praising and promoting Russia's role on the continent. There have been at least 16 such operations carried out on the African continent. A pro-Kremlin agenda targeting South Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana this year led to 23 million tweets being posted with the hashtags I stand with Putin and I stand with Russia. As you can imagine, these activities have obviously pissed off the West, no doubt, but the truth is, it's working. Look at what happened when the UN's General Assembly voted in March condemning Russia's attack on Ukraine. When a vote had been taken on whether Russia gets to retain its membership in the UN Human Rights Council due to the invasion, only 10 of Africa's 54 countries voted in favor of the resolution. 35 states were either absent or abstained from voting, and 9 opposed the move. But the West and the EU are not going to stand by. Since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, Europe has been frantically looking for natural gas alternatives to reduce dependency on supplies from Russia. Their imminent options are to turn to Africa to fill the gap and to continue its partnership with African states. There are so many opportunities here, but due to the lack of development, low supply, and severe bottlenecks, the EU isn't able to make immediate progress. We found this in a previous video we made on the Horn of Africa. Everybody wants something from Africa. On one side, you have America and EU members like France, and on the other side, you have countries like Russia and China. The African states are going through the most intense competition for influence over their regions from external parties since the Cold War. And at one point, what happens is struggling African nations become puppets whose strings are being tugged at by various world leaders with vastly different agendas. Vulnerable African states are accepting resources from different parties without actually looking into what its people need. That's leading to incredibly high corruption levels, and further fueled by climate change, poverty, instability, and disinformation. In fact, Africa is home to some of the most dangerous territories in the world. Look at this graph that I found that shows how forced displacement has been on the rise in Africa. There was a 12% increase since last year. The number is staggering. 36 million forcibly displaced persons, and this accounts for 44% of global numbers. What the people of the region truly crave for is a little bit of peace. The World Happiness Report highlights how those in Africa yearn for a calm life more than anybody else in the world. But with external parties like Russia continuing to control their lives, this dream is a far-fetched one. So on a macro scale, what does Putin actually want from Africa? To bring Russia one step closer to global supremacy by providing for African countries who make up the largest voting group in the United Nations. Putin hopes to form reliable and loyal partnerships that would provide him the leverage he needs. That's because Russia is not what it once was. It's not the USSR. Putin's vision is to go back into the past just to disrupt the future of countries like Ukraine and vulnerable African states. The world is now actively paying attention to the state of Europe and the war in Ukraine. Unfortunately though, Russia's control in Africa is often left out of the conversation.